I saved $1 for my kids, but they didn't come. They were too busy gifting champagne to the woman who called me a dog in letters. My name is Isabel Foster. At 66, I've learned that life rarely gives you exactly what you plan for. I live in a modest rental apartment on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me, my small collection of houseplants, and the occasional visit from my granddaughter. After working for over 3 decades in fashion exports, I took early retirement last year. Not because I wanted to, but because my body finally said enough. The divorce happened more than 30 years ago. I don't bring it up often, though the weight of raising 2 children alone has shaped everything since. These days, I split my time between tending to my little garden on the balcony and attending yoga sessions with a group of women who, like me, are learning to find peace in their golden years. My son Bryce is 35 now, a construction site manager with a sharp mind for logistics. He married Michelle, a real estate agent with perfectly manicured nails and a laugh that fills rooms. They live about 3 hours away by car, close enough for occasional visits, far enough to have their separate lives. My daughter Madeline is 32, fiercely independent and ambitious. She's climbing the corporate ladder at a tech marketing firm and is engaged to a man named Lucifer. Yes, that's really his name, though I've never had the courage to ask his parents about it. He has connections in political circles that Madeline seems increasingly impressed by. Then there's Vivian, my 5-year-old granddaughter, Bryce's little girl. She has my eyes, the deep hazel that skipped both my children. When she stays with me, which happens whenever Bryce and Michelle need a weekend away, we make paper flowers and read stories about brave princesses who save themselves. She tells me I make the best peanut butter sandwiches because I cut off the crusts just right. Everything changed 3 weeks ago. I was checking my lottery ticket, a habit I've maintained for 20 years, buying one ticket every Wednesday. I usually scan it quickly, expecting nothing, but this time the numbers matched. All of them. $20 million. After taxes, just over $10 million remained, a staggering sum that could reshape not just my life, but my children's futures too. I told no one. Not even Delilah, my closest friend from yoga class. I made the trip to claim my winnings wearing my ordinary clothes, signed the paperwork with trembling hands, and set up a separate bank account. Then I began planning. First, I found 2 houses in Highland Meadows, that upscale neighborhood where both my children had once pointed out their dream homes during family drives. I put down deposits on both. One colonial style with a wraparound porch for Bryce's family. One modern with floor-to-ceiling windows for Madeline. Next, I wrote 2 checks, each for $1 million. I planned to keep $3 million for my retirement, ensuring I'd never be a burden to them. The rest would be divided equally between them. My birthday was approaching, usually a non-event these days. My children would call, sometimes send flowers, but they were always too busy to visit. This year would be different. I decided to host a dinner. Nothing extravagant, just family. I hand-printed invitations on cream cardstock, addressing them in reddish-brown ink. Inside each one, I wrote personal notes about how much seeing them would mean to me. For dinner, I planned everything meticulously. Bryce loves spicy food, so I'd make my jalapeno cornbread and chili. Madeline prefers sweet and sour flavors, so there would be a mandarin orange salad with homemade ginger dressing. For Vivian, chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs and steamed vegetables arranged in a smiley face. And a small birthday cake, just 6 inches across with "Happy Birthday, Mom," written in simple icing. It had been years since I'd celebrated properly. The kids were always busy. Bryce with construction deadlines, Madeline with product launches. I understood, of course, but something inside me hoped this time would be different. Maybe, just maybe, they would come not out of obligation, but out of love. 3 days before the dinner, I received an odd call from Sammy McLean, my former neighbor and longtime workplace rival. She had a strange edge to her voice, hinting at a surprise waiting for me. I dismissed it as petty gossip. Sammy always did love stirring trouble. That same week, during our yoga session, Delilah suggested I should think about myself for once. When I replied that my children are my family, she gave me a look I couldn't quite read, something between pity and concern. The evening of my birthday arrived. I wrapped the house contracts and checks in soft red velvet boxes, placing them at the center of the dining table. I arranged the silverware exactly as Vivian had shown me from her kindergarten manners class. Soft jazz played from my small stereo, and the apartment smelled of spices and baking. I sat by the window, watching the street for their cars, my eyes constantly checking the clock on the wall. Any minute now, I told myself. Any minute, the doorbell will ring. The grandfather clock in my hallway struck 6. I sat at the perfectly set table, smoothing the velvet of my purple dress, my best outfit, saved for special occasions. I'd applied a light coat of lipstick, nothing dramatic, just enough to look put together. The dining room was bathed in the warm glow of candles, their flames dancing gently in the still air. My phone vibrated at 6:15 p.m. A text from Madeline. Might have to work late. Not sure if I'll make it on time. Don't wait up. I typed back quickly. I'll keep dinner warm. Take your time. My fingers hovered over the keys, wanting to add something about the surprise, but I refrained. Some things are better revealed in person. 25 minutes later, Bryce's message appeared. Issues at the construction site. Running late, Mom. Sorry. Shorter, more abrupt than his sister's. Typical Bryce. Always economical with words, even in apology. I wasn't particularly worried. They would come, just later than planned. Both my children had demanding careers. Delays were part of adult life. I understood that. To pass the time, I played an old voice recording saved on my phone. Vivian, at 3 years old, learning to say "grandma" for the first time. Her little voice stumbled over the syllables, turning it into something that sounded more like "guanma." I'd replayed it so many times the audio was starting to degrade, but it still brought warmth to my chest. I rearranged the napkins, folding each one into a perfect triangle. I wiped down the already spotless glasses until they sparkled in the candlelight. I turned on the television for background noise but couldn't focus on the program, some cooking competition where contestants raced against the clock. My eyes kept drifting to the door, ears straining for the sound of car engines in the driveway or footsteps on the porch. By 9:15 p.m., the silence in the apartment was deafening. The food had gone cold. The spices in the chili congealed into a film on top, the cornbread hardening around the edges. The birthday cake sat untouched, its buttercream frosting starting to melt and slide down the sides in the warm room. I called Bryce first, then Madeline. Both phones rang through to voicemail. I left brief messages, keeping my voice light. Just checking in. Dinner's ready whenever you are. I sent a message to our family group chat. I'm still waiting. Have a surprise for you both. As the clock ticked past 10, my concern shifted. I wasn't worried about them anymore. They were adults, capable of navigating their own lives. I was worried about myself, about the growing hollow feeling in my chest. This wasn't the first birthday they'd forgotten. There had been others. The year Madeline was studying abroad, the year Bryce's first child was born. But I'd never prepared like this before. Never invested so much hope in a single evening. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that they weren't coming at all. Not because they couldn't, but because they hadn't planned to, from the beginning. At 11:47 p.m., Madeline finally called. Her voice was breathless, ambient noise suggesting she was at some social gathering. Mom, I am so sorry. Work emergency, then client drinks. I completely lost track of time. We'll reschedule, okay? Love you. She hung up before I could respond, before I could tell her about the houses, the checks, the future I'd planned to give them. Bryce never called back. No additional messages, no explanation. I sat in the darkened dining room, staring at my phone screen until it dimmed and went black. The emptiness I felt wasn't just disappointment, it was a void, deeper and more complete than I'd experienced in years. With mechanical movements, I packed the food into containers and placed them in the refrigerator, a pointless habit, as if preserving the meal might somehow preserve the possibility of the evening I'd imagined. I folded the velvet boxes containing the checks and contracts and tucked them into my bedside drawer, locking away the extinguished hope they represented. Standing on my small balcony, I gazed up at the night sky, searching for stars, any small point of light in the darkness. But thick clouds obscured everything, leaving only a dull, gray blanket above. 3 empty chairs remained around the table. The 6-inch cake with "Happy Birthday, Mom" written in careful cursive sat untouched. A single candle had burned down to nothing. "I was going to give you an entire fortune," I whispered to the empty room, "just for one family evening together." I switched off the lights and walked to my bedroom, no longer expecting anything, yet not quite ready to abandon all hope. Sometimes, in the space between wakefulness and sleep, that's the cruelest place to linger, knowing something is over, but unable to fully let go. I woke to a dull ache in my lower back, the kind that comes from sleeping in the wrong position. Thin morning light filtered through the half-drawn curtains, casting weak patterns across my bedroom floor. For a moment I lay still, disoriented, before the memory of last night's disappointment crashed over me like a cold wave. My phone sat on the nightstand, its screen dark. No missed calls, no apologetic text messages, no explanation from either of my children. I checked anyway, sliding my thumb across the screen, only to find notifications from my meditation app and a weather alert for afternoon rain. I shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers, each step heavy with exhaustion. The dining room looked almost obscene in the morning light, evidence of an abandoned celebration. The table was cleared now, but the ghost of last night's setup lingered in my mind. The untouched birthday cake sat in the refrigerator, its frosting firmed up overnight, waiting for guests who never arrived. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt too close, the air too stale. I needed to breathe, to move, to escape the suffocating weight of rejection. Outside, the spring morning was crisp and bright, a jarring contrast to my mood. I walked aimlessly, following the familiar path through our neighborhood, letting my feet carry me while my mind drifted. The sidewalks were beginning to fill with the usual morning crowd: joggers, dog walkers, parents hustling children to school. Isabel, well, this is a surprise. Delilah Benson stood a few feet away, tugging gently on the leash of her excitable golden retriever. Her eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You're never out this late," she said, checking her watch. "It's almost 9. I usually see you at dawn with your watering can." "Needed some air," I managed, attempting a smile. "So." Delilah's eyes brightened with interest. "How was the birthday dinner? Did the kids make it?" I felt my face arrange itself into what I hoped was a convincing expression of contentment. "It was lovely, just what I needed." "Wonderful." She didn't seem to notice the slight tremor in my voice. "Did they like your cooking? You spent all day in the kitchen. I saw you through the window, running around like a hurricane." "Everything went perfectly," I lied, desperately searching for a way to change the subject. "How's Arthur's back doing after his fall?" Delilah launched into an update about her husband's recovery, and I nodded at appropriate intervals, grateful for the diversion. As she wrapped up her story, she patted my arm in a gesture of friendly concern. "Next year, book a restaurant, Isabel. Don't exhaust yourself cooking everything from scratch. Let someone else do the work for once." I nodded, already backing away. I'll think about it. Give my best to Arthur. I turned to continue my walk when a familiar and unwelcome voice called out from across the street. Isabel Foster, still wearing those same old walking shoes I see. Samantha Sammy McLean stood at the corner, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day, her sleek bob unnaturally black for a woman pushing 70. We'd worked together at Maxwell Exports for 15 years, competing for the European regional manager position. I'd secured it thanks to my fluency in French, an achievement Sammy always dismissed as dumb luck, rather than the result of years studying the language at night while my children slept. Hello, Sammy, I said, quickening my pace, hoping she'd take the hint. She didn't. Instead, she fell into step beside me, her eyes scanning my simple outfit with barely disguised disdain. Still living so economically? She said, gesturing to my modest jacket. Can't even afford a decent bracelet? I thought exports paid better than that. I kept walking, focusing on the sidewalk ahead. I'm comfortable with what I have. That's one way of putting it, she laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. Your kids doing well? I hear Bryce is managing that new office complex downtown. They're both fine, I said curtly, unwilling to share family details with this woman who'd once spread rumors about me sleeping with clients to secure contracts. Oh, they must be more than fine, Sammy said, a sly edge creeping into her voice. I saw them just last night, actually. My step faltered. Last night? At the Waterford, she continued, referring to one of the most expensive restaurants in Eugene. Here, let me show you. Before I could protest, Sammy had pulled out her phone and thrust it toward my face. On the screen was a video, surprisingly clear, showing the interior of an upscale restaurant. The focus was on a table draped in white linen, surrounded by familiar faces. My ex-husband Jeffrey, silver-haired now but still handsome in that conventional way that had once impressed me. Beside him sat Chloe Hartman, his former mistress-turned-wife, elegant in navy blue, raising a champagne flute. And there, on either side of them, stood my children. Bryce, in a tailored suit I'd never seen, his arm around Michelle. Madeline, radiant in a red dress, laughing as she handed Chloe an elegantly wrapped package. 25th wedding anniversary, Sammy narrated unnecessarily, a hint of malicious delight in her voice. Big celebration. Your Bryce gave a lovely toast. I couldn't look away as the video continued. Vivian, my precious granddaughter, skipped up to Chloe and took her hand. Real, Grandma. Her small voice was clearly audible. Will you and Grandpa come to my kindergarten sports day next week? I want you to see me run. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, not because Jeffrey and Chloe were celebrating. I'd long ago stopped caring about their happiness together, but because my children, my Bryce and Madeline, had chosen to be there with them instead of with me. And my granddaughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep countless nights, had called another woman her real grandmother. Bryce gave Chloe a lovely gold bracelet, Sammy continued, twisting the knife. And Madeline brought an entire jewelry set from that boutique on 5th Street. Wasn't cheap, I'd imagine. Called her Mom, too. So natural, like she's been saying it her whole life. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, unable to form words, unable to defend myself against this revelation. The pieces fit together with brutal clarity. Why they hadn't come to my birthday dinner. Why they hadn't even bothered with convincing excuses. They'd been celebrating a milestone with the woman who had replaced me in my ex-husband's life, and apparently, in their lives too. You always talked about how devoted your children were. Sammy's voice dripped with mock sympathy. I guess that was just in your imagination, wasn't it? I didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't explain. Instead, I turned and walked away, my legs moving automatically while my mind remained blank with shock. The journey home passed in a blur. I have no memory of crossing streets or turning corners. My body navigated while my consciousness retreated deep inside. Once inside my apartment, I collapsed into my reading chair, the one with the faded upholstery that had supported me through countless nights of insomnia. My face crumpled as tears came, the first I'd allowed myself in years. Not the dignified single tear of movies, but ugly, gasping sobs that racked my entire body. There was no one to witness my breakdown, no one to maintain composure for. And for once, I couldn't summon the energy to tell myself comforting lies, that my children were just busy, that they meant well, that family connections weakened but never broke. The truth lay exposed, as raw and undeniable as an open wound. I had been replaced, forgotten, erased, as though I had never existed at all. The shock of the video kept me awake all night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan making its slow, hypnotic circles, while my mind was pulled back more than 30 years to the beginning of my life as a wife, as a mother, as a replacement. I met Jeffrey Smith through a mutual friend at a charity auction. He was tall with broad shoulders and a confident smile, the kind of man who looked like he belonged on campaign posters. He worked at the city's policy research department, had a stable government job with benefits and a pension plan. I was just a part-time editor at a small publishing house, scraping by on freelance work and shared housing. My parents were thrilled when Jeff proposed. "You hit the jackpot, Belle," my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. "A man like that could have anyone. Make sure you keep him happy." We married after only a year of dating. I was 29, approaching what my mother called the danger zone of spinsterhood. I never knew about Chloe Hartman then, never knew about the passionate college romance that had supposedly ended but continued in secret letters, clandestine meetings, and whispered phone calls. Our married life settled quickly into routine. There was no passion, just schedules and mutual respect. We maintained appearances, attended the right parties, and smiled for photographs. He was busy with his career trajectory. I adapted to being Mrs. Smith and planning dinner parties for his colleagues. 3 years in, I became pregnant with twins. The pregnancy was difficult, but the birth was worse. 27 hours of labor ending in an emergency C-section. I brought Bryce and Madeline home to a house that suddenly felt too small, too loud, too demanding. No one helped me. Jeff worked late most nights. I was alone with two colicky infants, sleeping in 20-minute increments, my back in constant pain from the surgery, my breasts engorged and leaking. I developed what I now recognize as postpartum depression, though no one called it that then. I just needed to snap out of it, according to Jeff. I begged him to ask his mother Laura to come stay with us. She lived only 2 hours away and was retired. Each time, Jeff refused, saying his mother wasn't well, that she needed to rest, that I should be able to handle my own children. The truth came 8 months into my exhausted fog of new motherhood. Jeff's cousin Martha visited unexpectedly and mentioned how wonderful it was that Laura spends so much time with Chloe's daughter. I must have looked confused, because Martha quickly changed the subject, her face flushing. That night, after the twins were finally asleep, I confronted Jeff. After denials and deflections, he admitted the unthinkable. Laura wasn't ill at all. She was spending 3 days a week caring for Chloe's 5-year-old daughter from her marriage to Bruce Hartman, at Jeff's request. While I struggled alone with our newborn twins, my husband had arranged for his mother to help care for his ex-girlfriend's child. "She needed the help," he said defensively. "Bruce travels for work, and Chloe has her teaching job." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What about your own children?" He shrugged. "You're their mother. It's different." 3 years passed in a fog of resentment and denial. I focused on the twins, on building a life that orbited around their needs rather than my husband's indifference. Then came the day that shattered what remained of our marriage. I was searching for stamps in Jeff's home office when I accidentally knocked over a box from his bottom drawer. A cascade of envelopes spilled out, dozens of them, all in the same feminine handwriting. The return address, C. Hartman. I shouldn't have read them. A part of me knew what I would find. But I opened one letter, then another, then a third, my hands shaking harder with each revelation. The letters chronicled a decade-long affair, passionate descriptions of hotel meetings, declarations of undying love, plans for futures that didn't include their respective spouses. But what broke me were the passages about me. Chloe called me his fat, soulless wife, and the broodmare without a spirit. In one letter, she laughed about how I'd never suspect them, how I was too stupid and trusting to see what was happening. Jeff came home to find me waiting in his office, the letters spread across his desk. How could you? My voice was raw from crying. All these years? Even after the twins? He stood in the doorway, his face blank, almost bored. After a moment, he sighed. They're just letters, Isabel. You're making too much of this. They're not just letters, I screamed, hurling them at his face. This is our life, our marriage, our family. Don't be so dramatic, he said coldly. You're embarrassing yourself. I want a divorce, I said, the words bursting out before I'd even consciously formed the thought. His face darkened. Don't threaten me. He stepped toward me, and I backed into his desk. In one swift motion, he shoved me, not hard, but enough that I lost my balance, striking my lower back against the corner of the desk before crumpling to the floor. The pain was immediate, electric, shooting down my legs. My vision tunneled, and everything went black. I woke to the twins screaming from their cribs. Jeff was gone. To where? I didn't know or care. My back throbbed as I pulled myself up, limping to their room. I changed diapers and prepared formula with one hand, the other pressed against my bruised spine for support. The formula canister was nearly empty. I'd asked Jeff to buy more that morning, but he'd forgotten. Later, I found a half-written letter to Chloe on his desk, dated that same day. He'd had time for her, but not for his children's basic needs. The next night, unable to sleep, I pushed open the door to his study. He was sitting in the dark, holding a framed photograph. I flipped on the light to see Chloe's face smiling up at him from within silver borders. The look in his eyes wasn't just love, it was worship, devotion, an expression he'd never once turned toward me or our children. Something snapped within me. I grabbed the photo and tore it in half. I'm leaving you, I said, my voice deadly calm. I'm taking my children, and we're done. You fucking crazy bitch, he hissed, shoving me again, harder this time. You think anyone will believe you? You think anyone will help you? He was right. No one supported my decision to divorce. My father threatened to disown me, saying I was throwing away a perfectly good marriage over a man's natural indiscretions. My mother wept, begging me to reconsider, to endure for the sake of the children. Jeff's family closed ranks around him. His colleagues, our mutual friends, all vanished when I filed the papers. That night, after my confrontation with Jeffrey, I stood in the twins' room, watching them sleep. Their tiny chests rose and fell in perfect synchrony, innocent and unaware of the broken world around them. Was I just a stand-in from the beginning? I whispered into the darkness. A convenient replacement while he waited for her? I stroked Bryce's downy hair, then Madeline's chubby cheek. I won't let you become casualties of this sick love story, I promised them. I'll protect you both, no matter what it costs me. I couldn't have known then that they would someday walk willingly into the arms of the woman who had helped destroy their family, that they would choose their father's narrative over mine, that they would call another woman mother, while discarding me like an outgrown childhood toy. I couldn't have known that my own children would someday follow in their father's footsteps, replacing me just as thoroughly and callously as he had. After a night of mental collapse, reliving the past and confronting the present betrayal, I woke with a strange clarity. The morning light seemed sharper, colors more defined. My mind, which had been clouded with grief, suddenly crystallized into something harder, more determined. I walked to my home office and unlocked the steel filing cabinet I'd kept for over 20 years. Inside were remnants of another life. Old letters, divorce documents, property division papers, bank statements. I spread them across my desk, methodically arranging them in chronological order. The pain was still there, but transformed. No longer the raw, bleeding wound of yesterday, but something cold and precise. A surgical instrument rather than a bludgeon. I remembered how I'd fought back then, when everyone told me to surrender. When Jeffrey refused the divorce and moved out to think things through, while actually spending nights at Chloe's apartment, I began gathering evidence. I collected his love letters, documented unexplained absences, and unearthed financial records showing money transfers to Chloe, tens of thousands of dollars from our joint accounts over the years. Then I made the move that changed everything. I wrote to Bruce Hartman, Chloe's husband. The letter was a masterpiece of subtle revelation, cloaked in sympathy. I wanted to thank you for allowing your wife to devote so much time and attention to my husband over all these years. Their friendship has clearly been a comfort to them both. Bruce wasn't stupid. Within a week, he had filed for divorce, citing infidelity. Chloe, a kindergarten teacher at a private Christian academy, was dismissed for moral turpitude. Her carefully constructed image shattered overnight. Jeffrey was furious. He stormed into our house, red-faced and shouting about vindictive behavior. I remained calm, seated at the kitchen table with a folder of bank statements. I want every penny you spent on her, I said quietly. All of it. I calculate about $50,000. That's ridiculous, he sputtered. I never gave her that much. Prove it, I said, sliding the folder toward him. Or I can take these to court and the judge can decide. He didn't have $50,000. His political ambitions had stalled after a departmental restructuring, and his salary barely covered his new apartment and child support. Borrowing from friends was out of the question. They'd ask why he needed such a sum. In the end, he mortgaged his parents' house and took out high-interest loans to pay me. The divorce agreement was signed 2 months later. I received custody of Madeline, while Jeffrey kept Bryce. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the best I could negotiate at the time. I carried Madeline out of our former home on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Everything I owned fit into the trunk of my old Honda. Clothes, a few books, a rusted stock pot that had been a wedding gift. I sold most of our shared possessions at a flea market, used the money to rent a tiny 650-square-foot apartment, and enrolled in export management classes at the community college. Each night, after putting Madeline to bed in our shared bedroom, the apartment was so small she slept on a trundle bed pulled out from under mine, I studied French. I'd taken it in high school but never mastered it. Now I drilled vocabulary lists and conjugations while the 4-year-old slept beside me. I took a job as a warehouse clerk at Westlake Textile Exports, working the early shift so I could be home when Madeline returned from daycare. The pay was minimal, but the company had a tuition reimbursement program for job-related education. I used it to complete a certificate in international trade logistics. 5 years later, I was promoted to European Export Coordinator, managing shipping contracts worth millions of dollars. For the first time since my marriage, I felt in control of my own destiny. My salary increased substantially. I opened separate college savings accounts for both Madeline and Bryce. Even though he lived with his father, I sent monthly deposits for his future. I drove the same car for 15 years, bought clothes at discount stores, and never took vacations. Every spare dollar went into securing my children's futures. Jeffrey had married Chloe within months of our divorce being finalized. They lived in a large house in the suburbs, where Bryce had his own room with television and video games, luxuries I couldn't provide. Jeffrey would bring him for his court-mandated weekend visits, making sure to point out the contrast between our lifestyles. "Your mom chose this," he'd say, gesturing around my modest apartment. "Remember that. Steve." I never spoke ill of Jeffrey or Chloe in front of either child. When Madeline asked why we couldn't live in a big house like her brother, I simply explained that we had different priorities and that education was more important than square footage. Everything changed one Christmas Eve when Bryce was 11. He showed up at my door alone, wearing only a light jacket in the freezing rain, his face streaked with tears and something else, a red mark across his cheek. "Mom," he sobbed, "can I stay here? I don't want to go back to that house anymore." Between hiccuping cries, the story emerged. Chloe had slapped him for taking a second pork chop at dinner without asking permission. When he'd complained to his father, Jeffrey had sent him outside to reflect on his behavior for 30 minutes in the winter cold. I pulled my son into my arms, my heart simultaneously melting and hardening, softening toward my boy, burning with rage toward the adults who had hurt him. "Of course you can stay," I whispered into his damp hair. "This is your home too. Always." The next morning, I called Jeffrey and informed him that Bryce would be living with me permanently. He blustered and threatened legal action, but when I calmly mentioned the possibility of child welfare involvement regarding the incident, he quickly backed down. From that day forward, I raised both my children under one small roof. I worked longer hours, took on consulting projects on weekends, and stretched every dollar until it screamed. I managed to pay for school supplies, band instruments, sports fees, and eventually college tuition for both of them. I attended every parent-teacher conference, sat through countless band recitals, and cheered at soccer games and track meets. I helped with science projects, proofread English essays, and quizzed them on Spanish vocabulary. My own needs became almost invisible to me. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years. I cut my own hair. I never dated, partly from lack of time, partly from lack of trust. I didn't buy a house, didn't invest in anything but the children's education, didn't even visit the dentist regularly. When Bryce was accepted to University of Oregon and Madeline to Portland State, I took out a second mortgage on the small townhouse I'd finally managed to purchase. I co-signed their student loans, knowing I'd be the one to pay them off if necessary. When Bryce needed a car for his off-campus job, I sold my grandmother's pearls, the only valuable thing I'd kept from my previous life. When Madeline's roommate situation imploded midway through sophomore year, I paid the security deposit and first month's rent on a new apartment. All this I did without complaint, without keeping score. These were my children. Their welfare, their future, their happiness. These were the only metrics that mattered to me. And now, sitting in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of decades of sacrifice, I faced the brutal truth. They had chosen Jeffrey and Chloe. They had rejected me, not just for one birthday dinner, but in their hearts. The realization should have broken me completely. Instead, it hardened my resolve. I had survived Jeffrey's betrayal. I had built a life from the ashes of that marriage. I had raised 2 children to adulthood through sheer determination and love. I would survive this too. And this time, I would not merely survive. I would reclaim everything I had sacrificed, everything I had denied myself in service to ungrateful children. This time, I would live for me. Sunday morning arrived with unnatural stillness. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the dining table where birthday candle wax still clung to the surface like hardened tears. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I opened my laptop and searched for the video Sammy had shown me. It wasn't difficult to find. Several guests had posted clips from Jeffrey and Chloe's anniversary celebration on social media. I watched it from beginning to end this time, not turning away, forcing myself to study every smile, every gesture, every betrayal. There was Bryce, raising a champagne glass, his face animated as he praised Chloe for being the mother our family needed. There was Madeline, elegant and poised, presenting a gift box containing what I now knew was an expensive jewelry set. And there was Vivian, my precious granddaughter, nestled comfortably in Chloe's lap as if she belonged there, as if that was her rightful place. The doorbell rang at 2:30 p.m., startling me from my trance. I hadn't invited anyone. I considered ignoring it, but it rang again, more insistently. When I opened the door, Bryce stood there with Vivian in his arms. Behind him, Madeline smiled awkwardly, sunglasses perched on her head, designer purse slung over one shoulder. They walked in as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't abandoned me 2 nights ago. "Grandma!" Vivian reached for me. "I brought you a drawing." I accepted the paper with mechanical politeness but didn't smile. I looked at my adult children, who were moving around my apartment with casual familiarity, Bryce checking my refrigerator, Madeline examining the stack of books on my coffee table. "Sit down," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I have something to say." They exchanged glances before settling onto my sofa. Vivian scampered off to play with the basket of toys I kept for her visits. "Where were you Friday night?" I asked without preamble. Madeline's smile faltered. "I told you, Mom. Work emergency, then client." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "Where were you, really?" Bryce looked down at his hands. Madeline's face flushed. We had a family thing," she stammered. "A family thing," I repeated flatly. "You can stop pretending. I've seen the video of Jeffrey and Chloe's anniversary party." The color drained from Madeline's face. Bryce's jaw tightened. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know," I said, cutting her off. "What matters is that you both lied to me. You chose them over me, on my birthday, after I specifically invited you." Madeline's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of embarrassment, of being caught in a lie. "You don't understand, Mom," she said, voice cracking. "We need to develop our careers. Dad has connections, influence. He can open doors for us that you just can't." The words sliced through me like a blade between ribs. "If you can't rely on your father," she continued, "then what? Are we supposed to rely on you instead?" I sat perfectly still, absorbing the blow. All those years of sacrifice, of putting them first, reduced to a liability in their eyes. "Let me explain something," Madeline continued, gaining confidence. "If you hadn't made such a scene at City Hall back then, Dad wouldn't have been disciplined. His career wouldn't have been ruined." "His career was ruined because he was having an affair with his colleague's wife," I corrected quietly. She shook her head impatiently. "If you and Dad hadn't divorced, our lives would have been so much easier. Do you know what it's like growing up shuttled between two homes, being the kids with separated parents?" Bryce finally spoke, his voice low. "I used to defend you, Mom. I believed you were the wronged one. But now—" He rubbed his face tiredly. "Chloe is the glue that holds our family together. She's kind," he continued. "She's reasonable, and she never makes demands." "Never makes demands," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Unlike your mother, who demanded you show up for her birthday dinner?" "That's not what I meant," Bryce backpedaled. "It's exactly what you meant." I stood up, looking each of them directly in the eyes. "From this day forward, I have no children." Madeline's mouth fell open. "Mom, don't be so dramatic." "Get out of my house," I said, pointing to the door. "Right now." "You can't be serious." Bryce protested. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied. Vivian can visit whenever she wants, but you two are no longer welcome here. Madeline's voice trembled. Mom, please, you're being totally unreasonable. Get out! I enunciated each word with icy precision. They gathered their things in stunned silence. Bryce collected Vivian, who looked confused and upset. At the door, Madeline turned back one last time. You'll regret this, she said. When you're old and alone, you'll wish you hadn't pushed us away. I closed the door without responding, the lock clicking with finality. For several minutes, I stood motionless in the middle of my living room. Then, with deliberate steps, I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the velvet boxes containing the checks and house contracts. I tore the contracts into pieces, shredding each page methodically. I ripped the $2 million checks in half, then quarters, then eighths, watching the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. I opened my laptop and composed an email to my attorney, requesting an immediate appointment to draft a new will. I specified that upon my death, my entire fortune should go to a foundation supporting single mothers, women who, like me, had carried the weight of parenthood alone. Next, I logged into my real estate account and listed for sale the house where Bryce and his family had been living, a property I'd purchased years ago to help them when Vivian was born. They'd been paying rent far below market value, believing they were building equity toward eventual ownership. They weren't. The house had always remained in my name. I canceled my lease, contacted a moving company, and by evening had placed a deposit on a small but elegant cottage with a private garden and abundant natural light. It was more than I needed, but for once, that was precisely the point. I called a cleaning service and arranged for a regular housekeeper, luxuries I'd denied myself for decades while funneling every spare dollar toward my children's needs. As twilight fell, I sat by the window of what would soon be my former apartment, a new journal open on my lap. I had purchased it that afternoon, leather-bound with creamy blank pages awaiting my thoughts. I wrote the first entry with a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in 30 years. Today, I removed the mask of the perfect mother. It's time to live as a human being. I closed the journal, feeling lighter than I had in years. The pain was still there, a dull throbbing beneath my breastbone, but alongside it was something unexpected. Possibility. Open space. Freedom. For the first time since the twins were born, I had no one to consider but myself. No college tuitions to save for, no emotional crises to manage, no ungrateful children to please. Just me, my lottery winnings, and decades of life experience. I smiled at my reflection in the darkened window. "Hello, Isabel," I whispered. "It's time we got acquainted." My new home sat at the end of a quiet lane, sheltered by mature oak trees. Behind it ran a small stream that provided a gentle soundtrack each morning, competing with birdsong from the garden. When the early sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, it transformed ordinary moments, pouring tea, watering plants, into something almost sacred. I adopted a tabby cat from the local shelter and named him Fitzgerald, after my favorite author. Each morning he curled in my lap while I sipped Earl Grey and listened to Bach or Debussy. For the first time in my 66 years, I truly rested. No deadlines, no responsibilities toward ungrateful family members, no endless calculations about how to stretch dollars for someone else's benefit. As the weeks passed, I found myself spending afternoons reading in the garden. One day, while browsing a secondhand bookstore, an idea began to form. A space that combined my love of literature with my desire to help women like myself, women who had shouldered burdens alone. Within 3 months, I had leased a vacant building downtown, a charming brick structure with high ceilings and tall windows. I invested nearly $1 million transforming it into the second chapter, a combination cafe and lending library spanning 3,000 square feet. The interior featured comfortable reading nooks, shelves of used books organized by genre, a coffee counter serving organic blends, and abundant electrical outlets for freelancers and students. I hired staff who needed second chances, single mothers returning to the workforce, students working their way through college, people with disabilities often overlooked by other employers. We opened quietly, without fanfare, but word spread quickly. The nostalgic atmosphere, all wood, leather, and the mingled scents of fresh coffee and old books, drew a loyal clientele. Within weeks, the local newspaper ran a feature on this unique community space created by a retired businesswoman. Our social media presence grew organically, with customers posting photos of their reading selections alongside steaming mugs. While my new venture flourished, my children's carefully constructed lives began to unravel. Bryce received an eviction notice for the house he had believed was nearly his. When he ignored it, my attorney filed for forcible detainer. He called me in a panic, voice cracking with disbelief. "Mom, there must be some mistake. We've been paying the mortgage on this house for 5 years." "No mistake," I replied calmly. "You've been paying below market rent to me. The house has always been in my name." "But you promised." "I promised nothing in writing," I interrupted. "You have 30 days to vacate." Later that week, Michelle called, her voice sharp with accusation. "Your son is a failure, just like his father. I'm filing for divorce." Meanwhile, Madeline received an inquiry from her landlord about 3 months of unpaid rent, payments I had been making directly, which I'd stopped without warning. Her frantic voicemails grew increasingly desperate as she faced eviction. Cut off financially, both my children began attempting to reconnect. They called from different numbers when I blocked theirs. They sent emails, text messages, even physical letters. Bryce created a fake social media profile to message me. Madeline showed up at the second chapter twice, only to be politely but firmly turned away by my staff, who had clear instructions regarding unwelcome visitors. One morning, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. 2 officers explained that a missing person report had been filed. My children were concerned about my welfare after not hearing from me for months. I laughed coldly, showing the officers my ID and explaining the situation. "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine, just choosing not to communicate with certain family members." The officers left, but as their car disappeared down the lane, 3 figures approached my gate. Bryce and Madeline, looking haggard and tense, accompanied by a man I hadn't seen in over a decade, my older brother Jack. I met them at the gate, not inviting them in. Jack spoke first, his voice syrupy with forced affection. "Belle, we've been so worried. Mom and Dad miss you terribly. Dad's had a fall, he's bedridden now. You need to come home and help care for him." I studied my brother's face, the same calculating eyes that had manipulated our parents into leaving him the family business while I received nothing. "Doesn't Dad still receive his pension?" I asked bluntly. $10,000 monthly, if I recall." Jack's expression hardened. "If we hire a nurse, what am I supposed to live on?" I smiled thinly. "So, that's what this is about. You want me to become the unpaid caretaker so you can keep controlling Dad's money." "You ungrateful little—" Jack stepped toward me threateningly. I pressed a button on my security panel. "I'm my father's heir, Jack, not his slave, and you're trespassing." Within minutes, a security guard appeared, politely escorting my brother back to the street despite his protests. Bryce stepped forward next, his expression contrite. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. Can't you forgive me? If not for me, then for Vivian. She misses her grandmother." I looked directly into his eyes. "You gave a gold bracelet to the woman who replaced me. You called her your mother in front of my granddaughter. Don't pretend to care now. Mom, please." I'm not your mother anymore, I said quietly. You made your choice. Madeline, always more direct, extended her hand. What about the $100,000 you promised for my wedding gift? Lucifer and I are still planning the ceremony for next spring. I laughed, genuinely amused by her audacity. Your mother is Chloe now. Ask her for your wedding funds. Her face contorted with rage. I'm giving you one chance to make things right. You're going to regret this when you're old and alone. That won't happen. I smiled serenely. Unlike you, I understand the difference between being alone and being lonely. They left in fury, Madeline slamming her car door so hard it bounced back open. Bryce looked back once, his expression unreadable, before driving away. That evening, I received an email from Jack, threatening to sue me for failing to fulfill filial obligations. I replied with just one line, "See you in court." As I locked up for the night, stroking Fitzgerald's soft fur while gazing at my peaceful garden, I felt no regret, no second thoughts. The path I'd chosen wasn't easy, but it was rightfully mine. Perhaps the first truly independent choice I'd made since becoming a mother. Tomorrow would bring new readers to the second chapter, new opportunities to help women find their voice, new chances to live the life I'd postponed for decades. And for once, I felt nothing but anticipation. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was at the second chapter, arranging a display of classic literature when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Ms. Foster, this is Pine Ridge Nursing Home. Your father is asking for you. The doctors say it's a matter of hours now. I stood motionless among the books, feeling surprisingly calm. I'll be there soon. My father lay diminished in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors creating a technological cocoon around his once imposing frame. My mother sat beside him, her face etched with grief and exhaustion. Jack was nowhere to be seen. When I approached the bed, my father's eyes fluttered open. His gaze, once sharp and judgmental, now seemed clouded and uncertain. Belle. His voice was barely audible, a raspy whisper. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I said nothing, not out of cruelty or lack of forgiveness, but because his apology came too late to matter. 30 years, too late. Words couldn't repair the damage of decades, couldn't undo his abandonment when I needed him most. I stayed until he drifted back to sleep, then slipped an envelope into my mother's hand as I prepared to leave. $10,000, I said quietly, for the funeral expenses. She clutched my wrist, tears streaming down her lined face. Don't go, Isabel. Not like this. He's still your father. I gently disengaged her fingers. You had a chance to protect me, Mom. When he threatened to disown me for leaving an abusive marriage, when he told me to stop complaining and be a better wife. You said nothing then. Her face crumpled. I was afraid. I know, I said, without bitterness. But I'm not afraid anymore. I never saw her again. My father died that night. I sent flowers but didn't attend the funeral. Life continued its forward motion. The second chapter expanded, adding a small event space for community gatherings. We hosted weekly conversations with women who healed sessions, book exchange days, and scholarship fundraisers for children of single parents. Local television invited me to share my later-in-life entrepreneurship story, though I revealed only half the truth, speaking of new beginnings without mentioning the betrayals that necessitated them. 6 months after my confrontation with my children, Michelle walked into the cafe with a man I didn't recognize. She hesitated when she saw me behind the counter, then approached with determined steps. Bryce and I divorced, she said without preamble. He couldn't change, couldn't grow up. She gestured to the man waiting near the door. I'm moving forward with my life. I simply nodded and smiled, offering neither condemnation nor sympathy. I wish you well, Michelle. Her eyes widened slightly at my lack of hostility. Thank you, she said, sounding genuinely relieved. You built something beautiful here. Winter turned to spring, and with the first daffodils came another unexpected visitor. Madeline appeared one rainy afternoon, her face drawn and pale, dark circles beneath her eyes. A bruise shadowed her forehead, partially hidden by her bangs. Her loose clothing couldn't quite conceal her swollen belly. She sat across from me at my private table, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Lucifer betrayed me, she said, her voice breaking. He's living with another woman. Left me alone, 4 months pregnant. I set down my teacup, studying my daughter's face, so like mine at her age, proud even in desperation. You still have your father, I said calmly. And Chloe. Go to them. Her face crumpled. Dad's in the hospital. Stroke. Chloe left him when the money ran out. She's in Miami with some developer. I wasn't surprised. Leopards don't change their spots. As Madeline gathered her things to leave, I caught her eye. Remember what I taught you. A woman can live well without depending on a man. Start over. In the months that followed, Madeline sent text messages, apologies, ultrasound photos, stories of her new apartment, her job at a marketing startup. I read them all, but never replied. Still, I never blocked her number. Bryce's downfall was more complete. After losing his job, rebounding unsuccessfully with another woman, and finding himself responsible for Jeffrey's care after Chloe's departure, he seemed to unravel entirely. Chloe had withdrawn their joint savings before leaving, taking even the gold bracelet Bryce had given her for the anniversary. I understand now, he wrote in a bitter email, but it's too late, isn't it? I didn't answer that question. Some lessons need to be learned without guidance. My life filled with simple pleasures I'd denied myself for decades. I adopted 3 more cats to keep Fitzgerald company. I planted lavender along the back garden, where butterflies danced on summer afternoons. I traveled. A river cruise in Europe, a writing retreat in Maine, a pottery workshop in New Mexico. One golden afternoon, I sat in my garden with my old journal on my lap, turning pages filled with decades of self-sacrifice. On one page, underlined 3 times, I'd written, "Live for the children." I drew a single line through that sentence and wrote beneath it, "Live for myself, now and forever." The second chapter became more than a business. It grew into a community hub, a sanctuary. I established a foundation that provided microloans to women starting businesses, particularly single mothers. I funded scholarships, mentored young entrepreneurs, spoke at conferences about financial independence. On a bright spring day, a group of high school girls surrounded me at my usual table, textbooks spread before them. "Ms. Isabel," their leader asked, "will you teach us how to make a financial planning journal? For when we go to college?" I smiled, looking at their eager faces so full of possibility. "I'd be happy to, but first, you need to learn how to say no to people who don't deserve your time or energy." They nodded seriously, pens poised over notebooks, ready to absorb a lesson it had taken me 6 decades to learn. As afternoon sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, casting golden patterns across bookshelves and wooden floors, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Fitzgerald and his feline companion sprawled on the window seat. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the perfume of spring flowers from the vases on each table. This was not the life I had planned. It was better. Not because it was perfect or painless, but because it was authentically mine, chosen with clear eyes and an open heart. This was not just an ending to a difficult chapter. It was the beginning of the story I was meant to write all along.